Matthew, passing it over to you.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see familiar faces. It's good to see unfamiliar faces too. It's good to see people with their video off, all of us together. It's wonderful. Um, I know the last time I was here, I told myself I would shorten the bio, and I did, and it still sounds kind of long. I guess that's kind of how it goes. Um, maybe just let's just settle in for a moment and check in with where we're at. It is Friday night. For many of us, it's probably the end of the week. If you want to put a one word check in the chat, that'd be awesome. You don't have to, but just would like to see how folks are as they arrive in this space tonight with Sangha. Grateful. Sleepy. I feel that one. Tired. I feel that one. Friday. Exhausted. Anxious. Chillin'. Hopeful. Tired. Foggy. Happy to see you again. Meh. It seems like we've got the spectrum of the human experience tonight. Appreciative, exhausted, warm, safe, sad, stressed. Well, welcome to all of you, and welcome to all of it, whatever it happens to be. When we, first get mindfulness instructions, we're often asked, the basic ask, the basic invitation is to be in the present moment. Sometimes mindfulness is defined as being in the present moment. And sometimes when we get this introductory instruction, it comes along with something along the lines of don't get lost in thought, avoid thinking about the past, avoid thinking about the future, something along those lines. Pointing towards the idea that, the present moment isn't the future, it isn't the past, it's none of those things. And sure, it makes a lot of sense to not get caught in kind of like the rabbit hole of rumination about the past. But I've kind of been pondering this idea of letting go of the past and what it would mean to let go of the past, but if it's even possible to really avoid it, if the past is really avoidable in any sense. So I'd like to begin by turning to one of the discourses of the Buddha, and don't worry, we know they can be a little long. I'm not going to read the whole thing tonight. But this is from the Majjhima Nikaya. It's the Maha Sachaka Sutta, which means the longer discourse with Sachaka. And in this sutta, the Buddha is describing the night of his awakening. And what I'm going to read is about the stretch of time when he was sitting underneath the Bodhi tree for the duration of the night just before he found enlightenment. And so this is the Buddha speaking. When my mind was immersed in stillness like this, purified, bright, flawless, pliable, workable, steady, undisturbable, I extended it toward the recollection of past lives. I recollected my many kinds of past lives, with features and details. This was the first knowledge which I achieved in the first watch of the night. When my mind was immersed in stillness like this, I extended it toward knowledge of the death and rebirth of sentient beings. I saw sentient beings passing away and being reborn, inferior and superior, in a good or a bad place. I understood how sentient beings are reborn according to their deeds. This was the second knowledge. When my mind was immersed in stillness like this, I extended it toward knowledge of the ending of defilements. I truly understood. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the end of suffering. This is the practice that leads to the end of suffering. I understood rebirth is ended. My spiritual journey has been completed. There is nothing further for this place. And this was the third knowledge. And of course, I'm sure most of us recognize the third knowledge, right? The Four Noble Truths: suffering, cause of suffering, end of suffering, a path leading there. And it's so often what we associate with the Dharma, right? Because everything that we come to, all the lists seem to unfold from that primary list. The Eightfold Path extends from that fourth noble truth. But when we look at this particular night in the Buddha's life, I think it's interesting to contemplate the fact that the two knowledges that immediately preceded the Buddha's awakening essentially dealt with the past. They dealt with what he refers to as his past lives, and they dealt with what he refers to as the past lives of other beings. And we don't need to go get lost in the weeds with regards to our interpretations of rebirth. But I think it's important to understand that the Buddha essentially is saying that he came to understand cause and effect. He came to a deep understanding of the law of karma. And he came to a deep understanding of the way that the past informs the present, the way that he came to be there at that particular moment, and the way that other beings came to be there at their own particular moments. So we talk about this sometimes as a path of insight. And the Buddha doesn't really mince words when he talks about impermanence, suffering, non-self. When he talks about the karma, there are some suttas in which the Buddha essentially says that to understand karma, to understand cause and effect, is to understand the Dharma. And so in a way, awakening, the path towards the end of suffering, depends upon our deep understanding of the way that the past may inform the present. A deep understanding of what brought us here, what brings us here, what carries us forward. Sometimes I suppose we could think of the present moment as just like some type of space in between the past and the future. We happen to occupy it, but I sometimes wonder if I even know what the present moment is, right? We use this word, we use this phrase with kind of common understanding, but what exactly is it? If it's a space between the past and the future, then maybe it's just a space where everything that has been is perpetually transforming itself into everything that might become, everything that will be. And if the instruction is to get in touch with the present moment, to bring attention to the present moment, is that not an instruction, an invitation really, to look closely at the way that the past transforms into the future? And so how might the very essence of karma be seen in the present moment? How might our entire practice then be seen as looking deeply at the way that the past is unfolded here, at the way that the past compels us, and what freedom might be found in that moment? But I'm kind of stuck on this ambiguity around what the present moment even is. And so I want to explore that a little bit. I want to talk about the Big Dipper, the constellation, the Big Dipper. And I don't want to get too nerdy, so I'm not going to name all the stars in the Big Dipper, but there are 7 of them. Technically there's 8, but one of the stars in the Big Dipper is 2 side by side, and we can't really see the 2 of them with our eyes, so it appears as 7 stars to us. And all of these stars occupy different places in the galaxy. They're far away from each other. Sure, they're part of one constellation, but they're far away from each other. And the star that's the furthest from us is called Dubhe, and it's 123 light years away. So that means it takes 123 years for the light from that star to strike our eyes. And the nearest star in the Big Dipper is called Merak, and it's 78 light years away. 45 years of difference, one constellation. So if we happen to be out in the country, and if it happens to be nighttime, our present moment includes light that is leaving different stars at very, very different moments in time. In fact, one of the stars, the light that is striking our eye when we look at the Big Dipper, left its star when Teddy Roosevelt was still president, and the light from one of the other stars left when the Cold War was beginning in 1947. So our view of the sky is layered in time. And sure, we might say that, well, it's the sky. It's all very far away. It doesn't have much bearing on, my experience here on Earth. But sometimes we notice the way that sense impressions strike our eyes and our ears, and we notice that things aren't necessarily as simultaneous in the present moment as we think they are. I think of like going to a baseball game. If you're sitting out in left field or something, and a batter strikes the ball, we see that happen, and then a moment later, the sound of the bat striking the ball meets our ears. And intellectually, we know they happened at the same moment, but we experience them separately, as if they were separate moments. And so maybe what we're thinking about here, in terms of the present moment, is not when things are all happening, but more when they just happen to be striking our sense doors. So to go to a little nerdy example, but it's something I like to think about. I'll call it like the reverse telescope experiment. Imagine yourself as a child, 5, 10 years old, maybe joyfully running out in a field, running outdoors somewhere on a bright sunny day, and the sun strikes the skin. For me, that might have been 40 years ago. For some of us, that might have been longer or less. But that sunlight struck the skin on our bodies and then was reflected out into space. And if that were 40 years ago, then somewhere out in space, if someone had a telescope that they could turn back at Earth, 40 light years away, they could see that young child still walking on the Earth. Every moment in our lives is still visible somewhere out there. They could watch us doing everything that we have done. Somewhere out there, someone could watch the Buddha still walking the surface of the earth. Everything that has happened is still visible somewhere right now in this current moment. Makes me wonder what the present moment really is still. To me, it's awe-inspiring. I'm not sure if it lands that way with everybody here, but it's a marvel to me. It's a marvel to me that all of human history is still available in the present moment. So there's these moments when things happen, and then there's these moments that meet our sense doors, and maybe that's what we mean when we talk about the present moment. Because it's certainly not everything it's not all the events that are coming to our sense doors themselves. So this seems kind of like run-of-the-mill for the first 5 senses, right? Seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, hearing. Events happen, we notice them, they hang out for a minute, and then they go away. It's pretty simple. Sure, they may have happened at different moments in time, but it doesn't have a huge bearing on our life. But the mind as a sense door is a little bit different, isn't it? The mind has this tendency to receive sense impressions and then store them. It has this tendency to receive sense impressions, store them, and then regurgitate them back to us with varying degrees of accuracy. So the mind is a sense door. Is in many ways made of habits that are formed by memory. And I'm not just talking about memories in terms of stories. Sure, that's there. But all the different forms of memory. Memories of learning. Think about the way that the words that leave my mouth perhaps strike your ears with some degree of understanding, hopefully. Hopefully you understand the words I'm using. There's some grammatical structure that has understanding, and that's all memory. And it's memory that the present moment and all of our sense doors are filtering it through. We have memories of learning, we have memories of love, we have memories of trauma, memories of being harmed, memories of causing harm. All of these memories in some capacity, they offer a filter through which our present moment's experience comes through. It's almost as if the present moment is the past collapsed, that the past is layered. All the prior moments and histories in our lives, and perhaps even in the lives of all of humanity, is layered into this present moment for us to do with what we wish. In a prior life of mine, and I don't mean like literal prior life, just this lifetime, but long enough ago that it feels like a prior life, I was an archaeologist. And for some stretch of time, I was digging up dead people. It was a pretty cool job. Didn't pay well, but it was a cool job. And we have this term in archaeology that I think we borrowed from literature, or the archaeology of literature, but it's this word, it's called palimpsest, Palimpsest. It's not an easy word to say fast, but I love it, palimpsest. And rather than define it, it's probably better to just tell a little story. So imagine, if you will, maybe a lush forest and a creek flowing through this forest. And 10,000 years ago, a group of humans decided to settle along this creek and build a little village, and they did all their human things. And when they did their human things, they dropped things on the ground. Maybe they lived there a couple of centuries, and then they abandoned the village. And what's left on the surface of the ground is everything that they left behind, things that will become artifacts. And time passes and soil covers up everything they left behind. And 1,000 years later, another group of humans comes and sets up shop in the same spot. And they do human things, and they drop all of their human things onto the ground again. And eventually, they abandon that site. Time passes on, and soil covers up everything they left behind. Now imagine this happening over and over again, over thousands of years, and you end up having all these layers of human artifacts separated by dirt, separated by soil. And then climate change happens. The forest dries up, the creek dries up, and it turns into a desert. And what happens in deserts is wind blows. And as the wind blows, it starts to blow away all of this soil. The artifacts that humans left behind are heavy, and so they remain while the soil blows away. And over time, all of the different layers of human occupations collapses into one. And this is what we call a palimpsest in archaeology. That at this one layer, in this current moment, in this one snapshot, we have all of this human history collapsed and mixed together. And of course, it's the archaeologist's job to try to make sense of it. It's the archaeologist's job to try to understand what people were doing, what choices they were making, what stories they had based upon what's left behind in this palimpsest. And I like to think of the present moment in this way. I like to think of the present moment as this sort of palimpsest of everything that has ever come before, and that our practice with the Dharma is, in a sense, the practice of the archaeologist. What the Buddha was doing the night of his awakening was looking deeply at all of the remnants, all of the artifacts, everything left over from all the past lives of himself and others, in order to make sense of how things come to be. Now, many of this stuff is conscious, but a whole lot of it is unconscious. And so, in a way, the task of the archaeologist and the task of the practitioner of the Dharma is to make the unconscious conscious. Mindfulness practice, in a way, is a way of making, in some way, the unconscious, or at the very least, that which we ignore, available to us. Now, my teacher, Matthew Brensilver, he sometimes likens our Dharma practice, our mindfulness practice, as non-specific exposure therapy. I'm sure we've all sat down, whether in our daily practice or whether on retreat, and eventually something comes up. Something from the past comes up. It doesn't usually come up as we want it, as we choose it, as directed. It comes up when it needs to. It comes up as it has to. And a lot of the time, this stuff that's bubbling to the surface, even if we don't have a story with it, even if we don't understand what it is, even if it's showing up as some sort of dysregulation in the nervous system, even if it's showing up as one of the hindrances, as some type of agitation, and we don't know where it comes from, rest assured it's something we've been storing, and if we've been storing it, it's probably from the past. So one time when I was in the county jail, and this is a different lifetime ago, this would have been 20 years ago, and I'd started with the Dharma, I'd started meditating, but this was probably, I want to say, 6 or 9 months, very early in my practice. I was still in a ton of pain, and I really didn't know what I was doing. So forgive me for not being skillful. But in the county jail, I moved to a new pod, and there's a lot of racial segregation in these pods. And so different racial groups during chow time were expected to eat at their respective tables. Now, you could use these tables the rest of the day for card games however you wished, but during chow time, you had to sit with your designated group. And you couldn't enter the space of those other groups' tables. I wasn't too keen on this rule yet, so I finished dinner one night, decided to go walk towards the television, and I inadvertently walked through a different racial group's seating area. And I was immediately surrounded by a bunch of really angry people, a bunch of really angry men. And they were threatening, and I'm not going to repeat the types of things they said to me, but I was scared, I was angry, I was ready to fight. I was sure I was going to, let's just say the fighting would not have ended well for me because I was significantly outnumbered. So there was a lot of fear there. I talked my way out of it. But that event kind of, in a way, planted the seed of a certain type of hatred, a residual hatred that would persist for some time that I had to unpack later. But I didn't think about the event itself much over the years. And then flash forward 10 years later, 10 years of practice, 10 years of letting this non-specific exposure therapy do its magic. And I was working on a construction site, and there were a bunch of roofers who were squirting hot tar onto a roof for a roof. And they had put like a red rope, a red tape around the area where this hot tar kettle was. It was intended to keep us safe, right? They don't want people to walk underneath underneath their work area when there's splattering hot tar everywhere, right? But I saw a doorway that I needed to get in, and it was on the other side of this red tape, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, I do what I want. So I walked underneath this red tape and was immediately surrounded by a bunch of angry roofers. Now, they were concerned about my safety. Sure, they were kind of yelling and hollering, but they weren't trying to hurt me. They were concerned about my safety, but I nonetheless was kind of filled with rage. I saw red. I felt like I needed to be ready to fight. And in that moment, and it was the first moment of its kind for me in my practice, in that moment, the memory of being in the county jail surrounded by those people who did want to hurt me arose, and I realized that I was playing out the past. I realized that I wanted to do in that moment what I couldn't have done 10 years earlier. And this recognition took the anger out of it. It took the power out of it. The past didn't change. That was still there. But the past was no longer compelling me in that particular moment in the way that it would have previously. And this is one of the many ways that practice may reveal things to us. It's just one artifact, really, in the assemblage of what we call this present moment. So no, we can't change the past, but we might be able to rearrange it. I think I heard, I've heard this a few times, but it may have been Joseph Goldstein, and I think he was saying it in kind of like comic fashion. So he was describing Buddhist ethics, sila, as kind of a selfish practice. And he kind of jokingly said, could you imagine if you had to sit down on the cushion for a meditation and, earlier in the day you'd robbed a bank and midway through the day you'd beat somebody up. And then maybe you stole something from the grocery store right before sitting. It'd be very difficult to imagine having a calm, restful, compassionate, kind-hearted meditation after having done that, after having caused harm. And I know for me, for years of practice, a lot of what came up was remorse and shame regarding my own past. Is that what tends to bubble up and get in the way of really being mindful and being present is the past that in many ways what I did in my day-to-day lives was intended to avoid. And so what Joseph Goldstein was pointing towards is that Buddhist ethics, sila, in a way, is a practice of blessing our past, such that we might bring to our cushion the benefit, the gift of blamelessness. The longer our stretches of blamelessness, the more we bless our past, and the more available it might be to us when we sit. So I don't know if people do this very often with the Zoom here at Big Heart City, but I'm going to share a cartoon. I'm going to share a couple of slides from a cartoon, and don't worry if you're not staring at the screen. I'm going to describe it for you and read from it. And a quick word: I'm not an orchid expert. I'm not a plant expert. I'm not a botanist. I'm none of those things. But my understanding is that a lot of flowers, but orchids in particular, evolved so that the flower itself looks like the reproductive organs of an insect that might come in and pollinate it. That's my understanding, at least my basic understanding. And so this is a cartoon or a comic strip about one of these orchids. Everybody sees that? And this is from the artist Randall Munro, and it's called The Bee Orchid. So in the cartoon, there are two people walking in a forest, and one of the people is talking to the other. And this person says, "There are these orchids whose flowers look like female bees when males try to mate with them. They transfer pollen. This orchid, Orphrus apifera, makes flowers, but no bees land on them, because the bee it mimics went extinct long ago. Without its partner, the orchid has resorted to self-pollinating, a last-ditch genetic strategy that only delays the inevitable. Nothing of the bee remains, but we know it existed from the shape of the flower. It's an idea of what the female bee looked like to the male bee, as interpreted by a plant. And I'm going to switch slides. And the other person starts to talk. Wow. So the only memory of the bee is a painting by a dying flower. And the two people have kind of like walked away from this orchid that they'd seen sitting on the floor, on the forest floor. And that person walks back to the orchid and then kneels down beside it and says, "I'll remember you, bee, your bee, orchid. I will remember you." I'll remember your bee, orchid. I'll remember you. And this comic strip touched me in a particular way when I first read it. It's haunted me for a number of years. This idea that the forms, even in the non-human world, might be reflections and memories of things that are long past. The idea that this flower, to a certain extent, offers an artistic memorial in the shape of itself towards a bee that no longer exists. And what does that say about the present moment and its relationship to the past? Donna Haraway, who is really hard to pin down as who she is and what she does, so I'll just mention her as a feminist professor of biology, consciousness, and culture, says about this cartoon that it does something special. It does not mistake lures for identities. It does not say the flower is exactly like the extinct insect's genitals. Instead, the flower collects up the bee aslant, in desire and in mortality, no longer embraced by living, buzzing bees. The flower is a speaker for the dead. I like this idea. I'd like to expand it and consider the idea that everything that exists in the present moment is in some capacity a speaker for the dead. That our practice might allow us to hear what the dead is saying, what the dead are saying. I like this idea that the flower is an interpretation of the past. Our bodies, literally like the way our bodies look, are products of millions, if not billions, of years of choices that followed from preferences, from desires, from fear of death. We wouldn't look the way we do. We wouldn't think the way we do if the people in our past hadn't found particular things attractive or less attractive, for better or for worse, of course. So how might these two knowledges that preceded the Buddha's awakening be a perfected understanding of this history? How might this understanding of the present moment be, in a way, the past lives that the Buddha was referencing? And how might we come to understand our past lives by looking deeply at the present moment in this way? How might this be a way of understanding karma and how it unfolds for us? As we live our lives, we carve out what remains. We carve out what remains of this infinitude of ancestral choices, our own and choices of others. We might be able to, with mindfulness, of course, re-envision what came before, not change it, not discard it, not cling to it, but we might re-envision it. Keep what we like or try to. Discard what we don't like or try to. So how might we think of our being and what we do with this past history as an interpretation, as a work of art? How might we think of our practice as developing the capacity for creativity? That it's our task to rearrange this assemblage, rearrange all these artifacts that others and ourselves have left behind, and instead be compelled by them, be creative with them. I mean, what is creativity if it's not freedom? And what is this path about? Not freedom from a different past, but maybe freedom to do what we choose with it.